Oscar Piastri has been in the headlines with the controversy surrounding the announcement that he would be driving for Alpine next year and his subsequent rejection and denial. The Australian driver will now make his F1 debut with McLaren, and there will be a lot of pressure on him to perform in his new team. So has Piastri made his rookie season even more difficult, and could it even be a mistake? Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Finding an F1 seat isn't easy. Oscar Piastri is a driver that seems destined for great things based on his junior performances. He won Formula 3 and Formula 2 back-to-back, which is something that both Charles Leclerc and George Russell have achieved in their rise to Formula 1, and those drivers have gone on to become known as the future of the sport and are both driving for top teams. So Piastri is expected to be a great driver, and I believe he actually achieved his championship in F2 faster than his parent team were expecting. Alpine are a team that supported Piastri since the beginning of 2020, and I believe that when they signed Alonso on a 2-year deal to replace Ricciardo, they expected Piastri to race in F2 for 2 seasons, rather than for the Australian driver to win the title in his debut year in the category. As a result, there was no potential seat available for Piastri for 2022 with Alpine, and he couldn't remain in F2. So Piastri is clearly a very talented driver, and he's already seen as one of the stars of the future. This is why it was a surprise that he was unable to secure a drive for 2022 considering his results in the preceding years. But Piastri was part of the Alpine Academy, a setup that should mean he would be able to get a drive on the grid with that team in the next few years. But recently, it's emerged that Piastri wasn't guaranteed a seat at Alpine until potentially 2025, given Alonso was reportedly offered a contract extension for a year with a potential further year after that. This would have left Piastri potentially out on loan for a number of years, with Williams being the most likely destination. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. After all, another of the talented drivers I mentioned earlier, George Russell, spent 3 years at Williams before he graduated into Mercedes. However, Piastri wasn't keen on this potential outcome, and it's emerged that Alpine weren't in a rush to provide him with a race seat or a contract either way. Reportedly, contract negotiations were difficult throughout for Piastri and his management team, and many deadlines weren't met by Alpine, and the driver even described a strange feeling through the negotiations. Now we know through the Contract Review Board investigation that Piastri never had a confirmed contract with Alpine for a race seat. It makes sense then that the F2 champion and his management team would be looking around for a race seat for 2023 and beyond. The crazy thing in all of this is that they've ended up securing a race seat with a team that already had their driver lineup confirmed for next year, with Ricciardo and Norris both under contract for 2023. But with Ricciardo underperforming in that team, they were keen to break that contract in order to bring the new young rookie into their setup. This is where the spotlight is more on Piastri than ever before. But before we take a look at Piastri's situation in the spotlight, I want to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. Most of you watching haven't yet subscribed, and so if you haven't already, please consider subscribing if you enjoy the videos. In the spotlight. As we all know, the move from Alpine to McLaren has hit the headlines over the last month or so. Alonso's unexpected move from Alpine to Aston Martin triggered an interesting domino effect which meant Alpine were keen to bring Piastri straight into their driver lineup for 2023. This made sense as this year the French team has 3 drivers that are particularly talented, and they arguably made up one of the strongest driver lineups this year when you include test and reserve drivers. In Alpine's view, they had a contract in place to bring Piastri straight into the team for 2023 and beyond, but with that not being the case, there was confusion which hit the headlines. Following the team's announcement, Piastri tweeted himself to say that the team's announcement was wrong and that he would not be driving for Alpine next year. You can see from this tweet, and the fact that it has almost 400,000 likes, more than 50,000 quote tweets and almost 50,000 retweets, that there was so much attention on this situation. The outcome was then in the hands of the Contract Review Board, which resulted in almost a month of uncertainty and attention on Piastri, Alpine and McLaren. For a driver that isn't even racing this year to have this much attention before he even drives in a current 2022 spec Formula 1 car is very rare, and this level of media attention is maybe even unprecedented. Oscar Piastri has been involved in some private testing with Alpine, but is yet to make his FP1 debut, and there's a chance that he'll need to wait until 2023 now given the outcome of this latest contract situation. There's an awful lot of attention on any rookies that join Formula One, especially those that have a strong junior career. But for me, I believe that Piastri has only ended up with more pressure on his shoulders through this move. Not only is he joining a team that he hasn't worked with before, but he's also moving into a team where a driver with almost a decade of experience failed to get comfortable over the last 2 seasons. Not only this, but McLaren are currently behind Alpine in the constructors' standings. It's difficult to make a judgment on Piastri with regard to this, as the two teams have been very close so far this year, and remain close in the standings. Plus, as I've already mentioned, Piastri didn't leave Alpine due to the team's performance on track, but instead it was related to the opportunity to get a race seat sooner rather than later. So for me, it's difficult to put any blame on Piastri for this situation. The 21-year-old was merely trying to secure the best possible race seat for himself. But there's no denying that Piastri has the spotlight on him as a direct result, and he's added more weight on his shoulders to ensure he performs for McLaren when he arrives next year. The risk Piastri has taken is that he must perform next year in order to establish himself in Formula One. This is never going to be easy, and it's impossible to know if it would have been easier for Piastri to make his debut in an Alpine. But generally, rookies get a single chance to make their mark in the sport, and Piastri will be doing this in a team that he hasn't been working with through his junior career. Will the risk pay off? So, Piastri is under a lot of pressure to perform from many perspectives. He's had a strong junior career, he's moved to a team which has had drivers struggle in recent times, and he's also cut ties with Alpine, the team that invested in his junior career. Fundamentally, Piastri has taken a risk, but this is something that he had to do to secure his seat on the grid for next year. Personally, I believe his risk will pay off. Piastri is the most talented driver to not be on the 2022 grid, and for McLaren to offer the driver a multi-year deal as a rookie, they must believe the same. There's no doubt that Piastri needs to deliver in order to live up to expectations, and I think that the expectations on Piastri will be high when he begins his F1 career next season. Being up against Lando Norris will not be easy, as the British driver has seen a lot of success over the last 2 years and has secured a long-term contract with his team. There's no guarantee that Norris will be able to support Piastri like some more experienced drivers out there could, as it's been reported that Norris has tried his best to support Ricciardo through his challenging seasons of 2021 and 2022. But McLaren do have a track record of bringing young talent into their team, and hopefully that continues with Piastri. If there's any driver that could live up to expectations though, it will be Oscar Piastri, but time will have to tell on that one. And if you want to learn more about the driver Piastri is replacing, watch this video on Ricciardo's struggles next.